Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martorano and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Hi, everybody. Welcome again to the Behavioral Corner. It's me, your host and guide, Steve Martorano. If you are finding us for the first time, shame on you. Where have you been? I'll briefly tell you, this is a podcast about everything, because everything winds up affecting our behavioral health. It's all made possible by our underwriting partners, Retreat Behavioral Health. You'll hear more about them down the road. We want to welcome our guest right off the bat, since you can see him right away. Ben Ahrens joins us, and he's going to talk about something that I frankly knew practically nothing about, something called neuroplasticity. And it has to do with rewiring your brain to improve your health, which is a fascinating idea. Ben, thanks for joining us. Ben is also the co-founder of an organization called re-orgin. They are dedicated to this proposition that you can rewire your brain for health reasons. So, Ben, let me ask you something. As somebody who is reluctant to rewire an outlet in his home for fear that I'll get that wrong, to hear that one can rewire your brain sounds daunting. Tell me what we're talking about.
Yeah, so here's the beauty of it. The same way that you don't need to be an electrician in order to operate a light switch, fortunately, you don't need to be a neuroscientist in order to rewire your brain. But basically, the tenet of neuroplasticity is a scientifically proven phenomenon that occurs over, I've researched it now for many, many decades. And it basically just says that the brain has the ability to change both its structure and its function in response to new inputs, new activities, new environments, and so forth. And this is actually it was a fairly big breakthrough when this was first discovered several decades back, when they previously thought that our brain was fixed. And basically, from the time you're born until the day you die, you're just losing neurons, you're losing capacity, you're losing ability. And once they discovered that the brain is actually changing itself constantly throughout life at any age and at every age, that there's actually something taking place called neurogenesis, where the brain builds new neurons, it builds new connections, and it can ultimately rewire itself to do a whole host of interesting and very useful things, I think some of which we'll get into here.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, for sure, there's been a lot of research about this, and for sure we have, it seems to me that cognitive behavioral therapy is sort of, in a way, based upon changing one's thoughts to change their behavior. So there's a relationship between, if you think differently, there will be different results. What you've described, though, is the body automatically adjusting to changing circumstances without any prompting from anybody. But I think what re-orgin is saying, and I think you said this at the beginning, you don't need to bring in an electrician. You can do this. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples of rewiring our brain that we may be doing without even being aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I really like that you made that distinction. It's true that neuroplasticity, or the brain's rewiring of itself, is happening pretty much all the time. One example would be, and it's usually a subconscious process, anytime you see a new face, and then let's say time passes and you see that face again, if you recognize that face, that's to say your eyes recognize the pattern of light that's coming in through the senses, your brain has effectively undergone a form of neuroplasticity or rewiring to create a mental map of that new image. I once heard it said that probably everyone on the planet has a Tom Cruise neural pathway because they can recognize his face. And so whenever we encounter something new or learn a new skill, the brain is rewiring itself to gain that new capacity. Now, the difference in what we do at re-orgin is we take what is normally happening as a subconscious or an unconscious process, and we give people specific tools and a protocol to make it conscious. And this is what's known as self-directed neuroplasticity because it gives people the ability to actually have some agency into how the brain changes and what it enables you to do.
No, that's a fascinating prospect. Um, it would seem to be on some level the athletes who work very hard at their goals there or their activity are doing something similar to that. We call it muscle memory, as though the muscle had a consciousness in it. We're not really talking about that. Muscle memory is a result of what you've just said. If you do something 10,000 times, the brain is rewired so that you always do it that way. Is that pretty much an example of plasticity?
Totally, totally. Yeah, yeah. I love that example too. As reminded me of one of my favorite quotes by Bruce Lee. He said, "I don't fear the man that practiced 10,000 different kicks. I fear the one who practiced one kick 10,000 times."
Right.
Right? The core gem there is that when you do something with intention and repetition, that's to say, when you practice something, you actually condition or wire in a new pattern, in this case, a movement pattern, let's say
Mm-hmm.
to facilitate a kick, into your brain, into your nervous system, and into your muscles. And they're actually finding now that not only do we have something called muscle memory and a neurological type of memory, we even have cellular memories. The actual cells of the body retain information. And depending on what they've quote unquote learned at one time or another through usually repeated exposure, it will actually change how cells function, how they communicate with each other, and how they either support our health or can lead to its degeneration or pose challenges to us.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people get how deeply the cliche about 10,000 hours of practice would be, or Bruce Lee's quote about 10,000 practicing of one move. But at
Mhm.
the end result of all of that, it seems that what we're doing has become second nature is kind of silly, but it has become natural and automatic. We're not thinking about it anymore.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is like we're always practicing something. We're usually just not aware of it. For anyone that's struggled with a certain behavior or anxiety, uh, if we find ourselves getting anxious all the time, and this is not to say that you caused the anxious response, but by, in a sense, not practicing otherwise, we are unwittingly practicing an anxious response. And so the great thing about self-directed neuroplasticity is that it gives us a sort of framework for taking these previously unconscious patterns and processes that in large part have really been running for many of us, running the show, running a large part of our lives and experiences. And it gives us a means of wheeling that into the light of conscious awareness, where we can now put ourselves in the driver's seat. And we can, if we've been defaulting to a state of anxiety whenever it comes to social engagement or you name it, there is a series of steps that we can take to change that conditioning and to practice a new response. And by practicing that new response repeatedly, we can effectively wire in a new default state to the brain, the nervous system, the body, and even the cells.
And this is where, of course, your organization, re-orgin, comes in. You aid people in doing just what you've described. What sort of disorders or problems um, would neuroplasticity lend itself to helping?
Yeah, so there's a large category of conditions, complex chronic conditions, that fall within the realm of something known as self-perpetuating inflammatory conditions. These are things that have been notoriously challenging for mainstream medicine. These would be conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic pain, um, Lyme disease, like it was in my case, even long COVID. But anything that usually stems from maybe an initial impact or event. It could be a stressful event or an infection, but then where symptoms persist after the infection or after that initial sort of insult occurred,
Mhm.
um, that is where mainstream medicine has a really hard time identifying what is keeping these symptoms going, and most importantly, how do we help to improve the situation if we think we've already removed the root cause. So a great example would be chronic pain, because let's say if you feel a pain in the tip of your right finger, right?
Hmm.
And you look down and you find that your finger is being pinched in a vice. That makes sense, right?
Right.
That's what's known as peripheral pathology, because it's something in the periphery, it's in the body, something's happening, it's sending a clear message to your brain, move the finger out of this situation, I'm in pain. Now imagine for a moment that you feel that pain in your finger, you look down and there's nothing there. There's nothing going on. And then the pain disappears. And then it pops up in your left hand and your left finger and then your left foot. This is the experience that people have with chronic pain, and a lot of these chronic conditions where symptoms will shift and migrate, and there's not a clear, direct cause to point to. And this is something known as, instead of peripheral pathology, something that's known as central sensitization. You can think of that as like the central part of your body, the central nervous system, the control center of the brain has become hypersensitized to signals that are coming in. And so the great way to think about this and make the distinction is that while peripheral pathology, or pain due to an acute injury, is a hardware problem,
Hmm.
these types of elements that have to do with chronic activation of the stress response, you can think of as software
Software
problems.
problem.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. It goes to the heart of why, for instance, with fibromyalgia, it's a difficult diagnosis. As I understand it, you don't really get diagnosed for fibromyalgia. You get treated for a sort of constellation of symptoms
Mhm.
that nobody could really point to having, as you say, a peripheral um, cause. You just
Correct.
feel this phenomenon. And I'm speaking from personal experience here now. It's interesting. There are certain places where the pain will occur, and they shift around, and there's nothing going on, and this sense of fatigue overwhelms you, and there's no reason for it to overwhelm you. So that's a software problem. Okay, great. Um, Tell me what some of the techniques would be to rewrite the software.
Yeah, and first, let me just say that the hardware and the software are intimately connected. They're very intertwined,
Mhm.
and hardware issues can cause or lead to or contribute to software issues, and vice versa. So, oftentimes, chronic pain will start with an acute injury. Let's say there's a case where a person might have a broken arm, and so it makes sense for the arm to be in pain. Well, it's been broken and healing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then maybe once the wound heals, the pain even subsides, but then maybe the person finds years later that they get into a stressful situation, or they're exposed to a cold environment, or something happens that adds an extra challenge to the system. And now all of a sudden that pain comes back. So there's a scenario where what started as this peripheral pathology, what started as a hardware problem, has created this neural pathway that then lays dormant and can become reactivated whenever the system, the whole human being, is placed under significant amount of stress.
Do we have any research to explain why that would happen? Why the pathway remained open to pain? Do we know what's going on there?
We do, yeah. So there's a lot of research actually in this area, and it's really exciting. Just prior to this interview, I was doing another interview with a Dr. Afton Hassett from the University of Michigan, who wrote a book called The Chronic Pain Reset. And the crux of her research is really digging into why and how the brain forms these types of neural pathways. And basically, what happens is there's a term that was coined by, I think, Dr. Donald Hebb in the 90s. He said, neurons that fire together wire together, and neurons that fire apart wire apart.
Hmm.
And so when there's a certain uh, exposure, the brain basically has two top priorities. The number one priority of the brain is to protect you. It's to elicit a protective response. And
Right.
pain and inflammation are protective responses. When the brain thinks that the body is in danger, and it might be during certain times, it will send out these alarm signals in the form of pain or inflammation to get our attention or to elicit some change in our physiology. Um, However, the brain's second order of business is to strive for efficiency. It always wants to learn from the past in order to protect us in the future. And the way that it does this is by creating shortcuts or neural pathways. So if you can imagine, when you have an accident, you break a limb or something, that's a stressful experience. So if you're under stress and that pain arises, the brain might learn to associate that pain with stress. And that's why years later into the future, now let's say the injury is healed, the pain has subsided long ago, but you re-encounter a stressful experience. And it could be something caused by something totally different. It could be, life stress or work stress or relational stress. But for whatever reason now, that old neural network, that old neural pathway that formed because neurons that fire together wire together, that associated pain and stress, all of a sudden it says, okay, I'm under stress.
Does
The
it
appropriate
again?
response is to produce pain, right?
Yeah,
So even
yeah.
though it's no longer really appropriate.
Well, Bruce Ahrens, it's Ahrens, right? It's Ahrens. Am I getting that right?
Yep,
Bruce
you got
Ahrens
it.
is a co-founder of re-orgin, where rewiring one's brain for a healthier life is their core purpose. So let me ask you. Listen, this I'm not here to criticize anybody for using whatever drug they need, particularly chronic pain users. But it seems very often that when we treat something like chronic pain or even severe anxiety with drugs, we are treating symptoms and not getting to, we're treating symptoms and hoping they'll go away, but not looking at what's really causing them. Does re-origin and work like this, plasticity, sort of get closer to the origin of these things than, say, drugs do?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so there's certainly a time and a place for medication, if you're in severe pain or have an acute situation. Um, we believe that really neuroplasticity and working on the level of the brain and the nervous system is very much like taking a walk upstream and working on something at a very high level. Um, and so, by changing the way that the brain has created these neural networks, there's this great quote that we refer to in the program, one of my favorites, attributed to Einstein, but many quotes are attributed to Einstein. But this one says, it's not about finding the solution, but undoing the basis of the problem.
Hmm.
And when it comes to something like central sensitization, chronic pain, or chronic activation of the immune system, which can lead to a lot of conditions like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, I really believe that this rings true. It's not about finding what we think is the solution out there in the form of a pill, but ultimately about undoing the basis of the problem. And the
Why
basis
did
of the
this why
problem,
did this happen? Right.
yes, why did this happen? How did this happen? And most importantly, what can we do about it?
Right, right. So I know you came to this interest in rewiring one's brain for better health after an experience with Lyme disease. Is that right?
That's right. In my mid 20s, from age 25 to 28, 29, I was in critical condition, wound up being bedbound with a severe case of chronic neurological Lyme disease for 3 years. Um, Symptoms persisted in total for 5 years plus. And it was a real journey, especially coming from someone like myself who had a background in health and fitness prior
Mhm.
to getting sick with Lyme. I'd studied physical therapy and exercise physiology, and I was working in that field. And so much to my own dismay, when I got sick with chronic Lyme, the mechanistic understanding of the human body that I had developed um, fell short. It didn't
Mhm.
really help me to solve the issue. I had to take that walk upstream to the software and start to learn about the brain and the nervous system. And yeah,
How quickly were you diagnosed correctly? Because I know sometimes Lyme is misunderstood or not seen right away. How long before they knew what you had did they begin treating you?
Yeah, it took me over a year, well over a year to get a diagnosis of Lyme. I got many other diagnoses.
And like
Most of
what? What were
them,
they? Yeah, what were some of them? What were they telling you might have?
yeah, I mean, most of the diagnoses are fairly redundant and kind of heartbreaking to hear because uh, they really don't tell you much. Like fibromyalgia is one that really just translates to muscle pain. Obviously, chronic fatigue syndrome simply means tired all the time. If you translate it, it's like I could have told you that.
Right,
I had a program member the other day who somewhat jokingly said, "I went to the doctor with a pain in my knee and I got diagnosed with knee pain."
right.
Right. So
Mhm.
that was basically my experience. I also got diagnosed with anxiety, with depression, um, a lot of confusing things with multiple sclerosis was one diagnosis that was thrown out after looking at functional MRIs that were done in my
Right.
brain.
Mhm.
They found lesions in the gray matter, and
So how did they wind up circling back to Lyme? Was it a blood test that revealed it finally, or what?
finally blood tests revealed it, and then it was confirmed with a spinal tap, and
Ah,
they test antibodies. And one of the reasons why it's really hard to get a diagnosis of something like Lyme is that you currently there isn't really a way that you can test for the presence of a bacteria or an active infection in the system. It's an antibodies test. So they're testing for your body's reaction or reactiveness to a pathogen. And the problem is for many people with chronic Lyme, one of the things that happens is the immune system becomes exhausted and depleted, and so it doesn't have the power to react to the bacteria. And so if it's not reacting, then it's not going to produce sufficient antibodies to register in these tests. And people can
hmm.
easily get false negatives, so that the tests are not very reliable. If you do get a positive, it can be a good indication. But I will say that even then, even if you do get a diagnosis of Lyme, that then is bittersweet because it is not very well understood what it really is, what's really causing all of these weird symptom clusters, and most importantly, it is very much not well understood what to do about it.
All right, all right. So you say you had that for almost a decade, apparently, the symptoms of that. You're feeling well now? Do you suffer any lingering symptoms of Lyme?
I don't. I can honestly say I'm back to 100% health, and I define 100% healthy as you don't think about your health that much. It's just
Hmm.
not, it's
Hmm.
just supporting you in the background. It's something that's there providing you with what you need, the energy and abilities and so forth, but it's no longer this front and center question mark of how am I going to
Ben, do
solve
you
this?
do you do you um do you assign this wellness that you've achieved as a result of the techniques that you're now teaching through re-origin?
Yeah, so people always ask me, is brain retraining sufficient? Like, can I just do brain retraining? Can I just do this self-directed neuroplasticity and that will do everything? And I always like to respond that, we have a brain which is incredibly powerful and capable of amazing things as the control center really of the body, but we also do have a body, and it is important to support our bodies as well. And so for me, I will say that the neuroplasticity, the brain retraining absolutely had the most profound impact. And I attribute a lot of the progress and restoration of my health to being able to tune down this what I learned was an overactive stress response and allow my body's self-healing mechanisms to come back online. But it also, of course, helped to support myself by with proper nutrition, with
Hmm.
lifestyle factors, and just all the behavioral stuff that we can do to give ourselves the best chance of success.
What role does meditation play in neuroplasticity?
Great question. Meditation is fantastic for calming the nervous system. And when it comes to a lot of chronic conditions, a lot of them are perhaps not caused by, but perpetuated by a high, what's known as allostatic load, which is just a term for total amount of stress that builds up in the nervous system. And so you can think of meditation as a tool that can be used to calm the nervous system and to start to reduce that allostatic load so that the body is not in as reactive a state. Now, where meditation or classical meditation differs from neuroplasticity training is if you think of meditation being aimed at calming the nervous system, neuroplasticity training is aimed at preventing the arousal of the nervous
Hmm.
system in the first place. It
Hmm.
allows us to create new associations such that we can then re-enter the world and get exposed to things that might previously have triggered us, whether that trigger results in anxiety or inflammation or symptoms. And we can now encounter these challenges um, with a new default baseline that,
Hmm.
homeostasis that we quickly refined.
Yeah, some of the baggage has been left behind, and now
Yes.
you're out there a little lighter, facing the same things, but just maybe a little nimbler. Just this final thing about the power of the mind, so that we can get an idea that this isn't mumbo jumbo about rewiring your brain. There's a well-known phenomenon that's has to do with the lost limb, the phantom limb syndrome, where people have an amputation and yet they still have an overwhelming sense, including feel, that the limb is still there. How does that describe something of what you're talking about in terms of the way the brain works?
Yeah, phantom limb pain is a shining example of the reality of neuroplasticity and how the brain can maladapt uh, to create these sort of software issues or software glitches, you could see them as, where obviously it's a very clear-cut case in phantom limb pain because you might be experiencing vivid pain in your right finger, but the whole arm is not even there. And that was something that catalyzed a whole uh, paradigm of research, really, headed up and put forth by Dr. Norman Doidge in his book, The Brain That Changes Itself. And he wrote a second book called The Brain That Heals, or the Brain's Way of Healing. And in that book, he talks a lot about um, using neuroplasticity types of therapies and treatments for initially people with phantom limb pain, but then they found that, this type of pain that persists without a peripheral cause is basically a form of phantom limb pain. It just so happens that the
Hmm.
limb might still be there. So it
Yeah,
gave them a
yeah.
direct way yeah, it really helped them to hone the tools that they can use to tune down or retrain that pain response.
It's interesting, and I'm going to let you go here because we've kept you longer than as we see every day more and more uh, exponential leaps in artificial intelligence, and some people talking about these neuro pathways they're going to create with algorithms and machines.
Hmm.
I'm always struck by, well, okay, but it's going to have to be some extraordinary breakthrough before a machine can work the way you've just described uh, a human brain. Now, I'm not saying they can't get there. Some people are scared that they will, but it's an amazing thing that we have in our heads. And this is an amazing field and topic. I'm so glad to have you from re-orgin. If people want more information about re-orgin, where should they go?
Yeah, so for anyone that's looking to learn more, you can simply go to re-orgin.com. That's reorgin.com. You can sign up for a free group call every week. I do these live calls, answer questions about neuroplasticity and brain retraining. I really enjoy it. And last thing on that topic, I'm so glad that you brought that up because um, this is one area where my thinking also, I would say, really differs with the mainstream, especially technologists who think that, and may have a point that artificial intelligence is going to reach this full-on singularity point. I think for me, and from everything that I've learned, from everything that I know through my own experience and research, the critical missing thing in artificial intelligence and the leg up that a human being has is we have a brain, but we also have a central nervous system and we have a body. And we
Mm.
can use the sensory mechanisms of that body to interface with the world. And I know there's cameras and sensors and all this kind of stuff, but nothing comes close to the level of perception that the human being and the human body has. And for that reason, I think the brain is incredible, but it's also seated in this magnificent instrument that helps us move through the world and become who we are.
Yeah, yeah, they're going to get very good at what they do, but I agree with you. I think the ghost is will not be in the machine. It may
Yes.
look like it's in the machine, but it's hard to imagine that it'll really be there. Re-origin, you can find it online. You do a lot of this stuff right over the internet, correct?
Yep, we have an online community. People can join. They can watch a 28-day brain retraining program that walks them through the ins and outs. Very tactical, very practical, easy to go through. They'll be part of a community. They can join group coaching calls all over the internet. So we have people from all over the world, Australia, every part of Europe, India, Asia, you name it.
Ben, thanks so much. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us. Love to have you back on the corner at some time. It's a fascinating topic.
Thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed our conversation.
And take care to you all as well. Thanks for watching. Don't forget, follow us on Facebook and Instagram and all those things, and push the subscribe button. And we'll catch you next time on the Behavioral Corner. Take care. Bye-bye.
Retreat Behavioral Health has proudly been serving the community for over 10 years. Here at Retreat, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 or visit us at www.retreatbehavioralhealth.com to begin your journey today.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.